The suitcase hit the wet pavement with a crack that echoed through the rain. Raikel's hands reached for it, but David's voice stopped her cold. "I need a legacy, not a dead end. You're useless." The door slammed. The lock clicked. The rain kept falling. Raikel stood there in the downpour, wedding ring still on her finger, watching the only home she'd known for 5 years disappear behind a closed door, behind closed eyes that couldn't see her, behind a man who'd decided she was broken. 3 years later, the world is covered in snow instead of rain, and David Carter is standing on a frozen sidewalk, hands shoved in the pockets of a worn jacket that's seen better days. So has he. His hair's grayer now, thinner at the temples. The confident stride is gone, replaced by the shuffle of a man who's learned what losing everything actually feels like. He's watching the street when it happens. The sound comes first. A purr that doesn't belong in this neighborhood, low and expensive and impossibly smooth. David's head turns, expecting some celebrity, some athlete, someone who matters. The black luxury sedan pulls up to the curb like a panther claiming territory. The door opens, and David's world stops. Racheal. But not the Raikel he remembers, not the woman who begged him for one more chance, sobbing on their doorstep 3 years ago, mascara running, dignity shattered. This woman steps out of that $500,000 vehicle like she was born in it. Her skin glows against the elegant black maternity dress that hugs every curve, every expensive inch of her. Her hair is pulled back in a sleek bun that probably cost more than David's last 3 haircuts combined. Gold earrings catch the winter light, and then David sees it, the belly. His barren wife is pregnant, not just pregnant, massively, beautifully, undeniably pregnant with what has to be twins, judging by the size. The shock hits him like a physical blow. His jaw drops open, hands flying out in a gesture. That's half confusion, half plea, all pathetic. The air leaves his lungs in a visible cloud. His eyes go wide, pupils dilating with the kind of horror that comes from realizing you threw away a diamond because you were convinced it was glass. She was never broken. He was. But Raikel doesn't even look at him. She's looking up, and that's when David sees the hand. Tattooed, possessive, deadly. The hand slides around Raikel's waist with the casual ownership of a man who's never had to ask permission for anything. Another hand rests on her belly, protective and claiming at once. Both hands bear silver rings that catch the light like warnings. Then the man steps into view, and David's confusion turns to something that tastes like copper and feels like doom. Chung Min. He's everything David isn't. Tailored black suit that probably costs more than David's car. Crisp white shirt unbuttoned just enough to reveal intricate tattoos crawling up his neck, dark serpents that seem to move in the winter light. His hair is slicked back with aggressive precision. His posture is a weapon, but it's his face that makes David's knees weak. Chang Min isn't looking at Racheal. He's staring at David with the kind of focus a predator reserves for prey. His eyes are chips of black ice, cold and absolutely certain. His body angles between Racheal and David like a human shield, like a wall David couldn't climb if he had a lifetime. One of Chang Min's hands remains on Racheal's belly. The other slides to her shoulder, claiming, protecting, warning. Racheal leans into him, her hand covering his on her stomach. The gesture is intimate, complete, a unity that speaks louder than words ever could. She glances at David for half a second, and in that glance, he sees everything he lost. Then she looks away, like he's not worth her time, like he's already forgotten, like he's nothing but a ghost haunting a street corner while she lives in a world he can't even imagine. Chang Min leans down, whispers, something in her ear. She smiles, the kind of smile that lights her entire face, the kind of smile David hasn't seen in years because he never put it there. Chang Min's lips brush her temple, and his eyes never leave David's face. The message is clear, silent, absolute. She's mine. These children are mine. This life is mine. And if you take one step closer, I'll remind you why they call me the Black Serpent." David's mouth opens, but nothing comes out. What can he say? What words exist for this moment? For watching your ex-wife, the one you called broken and barren and useless, step out of a luxury car pregnant with another man's twins while that man looks at you like you're already dead. The car door closes with a soft, expensive thud. Chung Min guides Raikel toward the building, his body still angled to keep David in sight. His hand never leaves her. His eyes promise violence if David so much as breathes wrong. And David stands there on that freezing sidewalk, snow beginning to fall, again, watching the woman he destroyed walk away with a man who looks like he'd burn the world to keep her safe. 3 years ago, David threw Raikel out in the rain and called her worthless. Now she's wearing designer maternity wear and leaning into a man whose tattoos suggest he's killed for less than disrespect. The cosmic joke isn't lost on David. He spent 5 years telling Racheal she was the problem, that her body was defective, that she couldn't give him the legacy he deserved. But she just did. For someone else. For someone who looks at her like she's a queen. For someone whose hand on her belly says, "Mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to kill for." David's hands are still outstretched, frozen in that pathetic gesture of shock. His breath comes in ragged clouds. Behind him, someone walks past, muttering about him blocking the sidewalk. He doesn't move, can't move, because he's just seen his biggest mistake step out of a car worth $500,000, pregnant with twins. That should have been his, protected by a man whose eyes promise that if David ever comes near her again, they'll never find the body. And the worst part, the part that makes David's chest feel like it's caving in, is that Racheal barely looked at him, like he's not worth the effort, like he's a closed chapter in a book she's already finished. 3 years ago, she was sobbing on his doorstep, begging for one more chance. Now she's the one walking away, and David's the one left standing in the cold, drowning in regret. Welcome to Ruthless Romance Tales, where thrown-away wives come back draped in diamonds and danger, where mafia bosses protect what's theirs with lethal devotion, and where karma doesn't just knock. She arrives in a luxury sedan with a dragon breathing fire at anyone who ever hurt her. If you're here for safe stories, you're in the wrong place. We do obsessive. We do dangerous. We do the kind of love that scars your soul and the kind of revenge that satisfies it. This is where discarded women become queens, and where the men who underestimated them learn that hell hath no fury, like a woman who found someone willing to burn the world for her. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. Because Racheal Carter just became Chang Min, David's about to discover the truth about his own fertility, and Chang Min doesn't forgive threats to his family. Ever. The first night after David threw her out, Raikel slept in her car. The second night, she slept in her car. The third night, she sold her car to pay for a week in a motel that smelled like cigarettes and broken dreams. By the fourth night, she was staring at her bank account, $247.83, and realizing that dignity was a luxury she could no longer afford. The wedding ring was the first thing to go. She walked into a pawn shop with her hand shaking and walked out with $380 and an empty finger that felt lighter than it should. The next morning, she stood in front of a cracked mirror in that motel bathroom, looking at a woman she barely recognized. Hollow eyes, hollow cheeks, hollow everything. But Hollow wasn't dead. Hollow could still move. Hollow could still survive. She found work within a week. The Obsidian Lounge wasn't the kind of place that asked for references or ran background checks. It was the kind of place that hired you if you showed up sober and willing. Racheal was both, barely. The job was simple. Clean the VIP rooms after closing, empty the ashtrays, scrub the champagne stains off Italian leather, and don't ask questions about the clientele. She didn't. Asking questions required energy she didn't have. All her energy went into existing, into waking up, into putting one foot in front of the other, into not thinking about the fact that somewhere David was probably telling people he'd dodged a bullet, that he'd dumped the defective wife before she wasted more of his time. 3 months passed like that. Raikel became invisible, which was exactly what she wanted. She cleaned rooms at 2 a.m., slept until noon, ate ramen from styrofoam cups, and tried very hard not to feel anything at all. Then came the night that changed everything. She was cleaning the Serpent room, the most exclusive VIP suite in the club, reserved for people whose names didn't appear on any guest list. She'd been told to wait until 3 a.m. to make absolutely sure the room was empty before entering. She waited until 3:15 just to be safe. The room looked empty, sounded empty. She pushed her cleaning cart inside, already mentally cataloging the work ahead. Champagne glasses everywhere, cigar ash on the marble table, what looked like whiskey spilled on the white carpet. She was halfway across the room when she heard the voice. Low, cold, speaking in Korean. Racheal froze, mop in hand, heart suddenly thundering in her chest. The voice was coming from the private balcony, separated from the main room by heavy curtains she'd thought were decorative. Through a gap in the fabric, she could see shadows. 2 men, maybe 3. She should have left, should have backed out quietly, pretended she'd never entered, but her feet wouldn't move, paralyzed by the tone of that voice. It wasn't angry. It was worse than angry. It was the sound of someone calmly discussing violence the way other people discuss the weather. Then she heard the second sound, a whimper, a man's voice pleading in broken English. Please, I can get the money. 2 more weeks, please. The cold voice responded in English now. You had 2 weeks. Then you had 2 more. Then you had 2 more after that. I don't give thirds chances, Mr. Chen. I barely give second ones. Rachel's hands tightened on the mop handle. She should move, should run. But her body betrayed her, turning slightly, trying to see through that gap in the curtains. She caught a glimpse of the pleading man on his knees, caught a glimpse of another man standing over him, hand resting casually on something at his hip. And then she saw him, the man with the cold voice. He was leaning against the balcony railing, silhouetted against the city lights beyond. Even in shadow, he radiated authority, danger, absolute control. He tilted his head slightly, and his profile cut through the darkness like a blade. Sharp jaw, slicked hair, the glint of something metallic at his neck, a chain, or maybe the edge of a tattoo. Do it, he said quietly. Rachel's mop hit the floor with a clatter that echoed through the room like a gunshot. Every head on that balcony turned toward her. The curtains were ripped aside, and suddenly Raikel was staring at 3 men in expensive suits, 1 man on his knees, and a 4th man who looked at her with eyes that could cut glass. Chung Min. She'd heard whispers about him. The owner, the boss, the man you didn't look at directly if you valued your employment or your life. He stared at her for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then he spoke, his voice carrying that same terrible calm. Bring her. 2 of the suited men moved toward Raikel before her brain could process the command. She stumbled backward, hands up, words tumbling out. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. I was just cleaning. I'll go. I'll forget. I swear. Bring her, Chang Min repeated, not even looking at Raikel now. He'd already dismissed her, already decided her fate while she was still pleading for it. The men grabbed her arms, not rough, but not gentle either, and walked her onto the balcony. The kneeling man was gone now, disappeared like he'd never existed. Only Chang Min remained, leaning against that railing, studying Raikel with the kind of focus that made her skin prickle. Up close, he was devastating. Not handsome in the conventional sense, but commanding in a way that made handsomeness irrelevant. His suit was midnight black, tailored to perfection. His shirt was unbuttoned, at the collar revealing the edge of a tattoo that disappeared beneath the fabric. His face was all sharp angles and cold assessment. What's your name? He asked. Rachel's mouth was dry. Raikel Carter. How long have you worked here, Raikel Carter? 3 months. And in 3 months, have you seen anything that concerned you? She should have said no, should have played dumb, should have done anything except what she actually did, which was meet his eyes and tell the truth. Only tonight. Something flickered across Chung Min's face. Surprise, maybe, or interest. You're not afraid. I'm terrified, Racheal corrected, but I'm also too tired to lie about it. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant thrum of music from the club below. Chang Min studied her like she was a puzzle he was deciding whether to solve or discard. Then he dismissed his men with a slight gesture. They left, the balcony door closed, and Raikel was alone with a man who'd just ordered someone's fate, decided with 2 words. You shouldn't have been in that room, Chang Min said. I know. You heard things you shouldn't have heard. I know. Most people would be begging for their lives right now. Racheal laughed, a sound that came out bitter and broken. I've been begging for things for months. It never works. So what's the point? Chung Min's head tilted slightly. What happened to you? The question caught her off guard. It was too personal, too interested, too human, coming from a man who'd just ordered violence without a flicker of emotion. Nothing special, Racheal said. Just another woman who believed the wrong man. Something shifted in Chung Min's expression. Not sympathy. He didn't seem capable of something that soft, but understanding, recognition. You clean well, he said after a moment. Racheal blinked. What? The rooms. You're thorough, careful. My manager mentioned you. He straightened from the railing, hands sliding into his pockets. I need someone thorough and careful for a different kind of cleaning. I don't understand. My books, Chung Min said. The legitimate ones. The businesses I run that actually appear on tax returns. I need someone to manage the finances, track the expenses, make sure everything looks proper for the authorities. His eyes locked on hers. I need someone who knows how to be invisible. Racheal's heart was hammering again, but for a different reason now. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a choice. Keep cleaning rooms at 3 a.m. for minimum wage, or work in my office managing accounts for 10 times that. He paused. The work is legal, boring actually. Spreadsheets and receipts, and making sure the restaurants and clubs I own file proper paperwork. And the other work? The illegal part? You'll never touch it, never see it. That's the point of having 2 sets of books. Chang Min moved closer, and Racheal could smell his cologne, expensive, understated, lethal. But you'll know it exists. You'll know who I am, what I do, and you'll keep your mouth shut about all of it. Why me? Because you've already seen the worst thing you could see, and you're still standing here asking questions instead of running. His lips curved into something that might have been a smile on a less dangerous man. And because you look like someone who understands that sometimes survival requires compromise. He wasn't wrong. Racheal thought about her motel room, about her dwindling savings, about the fact that she'd pawned her wedding ring for grocery money. She thought about David's voice screaming that she was useless. When do I start? She asked. Chung Min's almost smile widened. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., don't be late. A year later, Raikel had an apartment with heating that actually worked. She had a wardrobe that consisted of more than thrift store clearance items. She had a bank account with 5 figures in it. And she had Chung Min, though she wasn't quite sure what to call, what they had. It started professionally. She showed up at 9 a.m. every day, worked in a glass office overlooking the city, and managed spreadsheets for restaurants and nightclubs and real estate holdings. The work was exactly as boring as promised. It was also satisfying in a way she hadn't expected. She was good at it, good at finding discrepancies, at organizing chaos, at making numbers tell stories. Chung Min noticed. He started asking her opinion on acquisitions, started having lunch brought to her office so they could discuss quarterly projections, started staying late when she stayed late, the 2 of them alone in a building that emptied out at 6 p.m., The first time he touched her was an accident. She'd dropped a folder, papers scattering across his desk. They both reached for the same document, and his hand covered hers. He didn't move it. Neither did she. "You're different than you were a year ago," he said quietly. "You mean I don't look like I'm waiting to die anymore?" "I mean, you look like you remember how to live." The kiss happened 3 weeks later. Racheal was working late. Chang Min brought coffee, and suddenly they were staring at each other across her desk with an electricity that had been building for months. He moved first, but she met him halfway. The kiss was intense, consuming, nothing like the dutiful pecks David used to give her before leaving for work. Chung Min kissed like he did everything else, with absolute focus and devastating precision. They didn't talk about what it meant, didn't label it. Chang Min wasn't the kind of man who dated, and Raikel wasn't sure she knew how to be someone's girlfriend anymore. But they were something. He drove her home, sent cars for her in the morning, started appearing at her apartment door at midnight with takeout and a look that said he'd been thinking about her all day. 6 months into whatever they were, Racheal fainted at work. 1 minute she was reviewing expense reports, the next she was on the floor with Chang Min's face hovering above hers, his usual calm shattered into something that looked like terror. "Get Dr. Yang," he snapped at someone. "Now." "I'm fine," Racheal tried to say, but the room was spinning. Dr. Yang arrived within 20 minutes, a thin man with kind eyes who'd been the syndicate's physician for decades. He examined Racheal in Chung Min's office, while Chang Min paced like a caged animal. "When was your last period?" Dr. Yang asked gently. Racheal's mind went blank. I don't know. I've been irregular since the divorce." "Have you been experiencing any nausea, fatigue, sensitivity to smells?" The room tilted again. "You think I'm pregnant?" Dr. Yang smiled. "I think we should run a test to be certain." The test came back positive. So did the second one, and the third, and the ultrasound that showed not one heartbeat, but 2. Twins. Racheal sat in that exam chair, staring at the screen, unable to process what she was seeing. Dr. Yang was talking about due dates and prenatal vitamins, but all Racheal could hear was David's voice. Barren, broken, useless. "I don't understand," she whispered. "My ex-husband. We tried for 3 years. He said I couldn't." Dr. Yang's expression shifted into something that looked like understanding. "Ms. Carter, there is nothing wrong with your reproductive system. You are perfectly healthy and perfectly fertile." The words hit her like a physical blow. "He lied? Or he was misinformed," Dr. Yang said carefully. "But I can tell you with absolute certainty that the issue was never you." Chang Min drove her home in silence. Racheal stared out the window, watching the city blur past, her mind a chaos of revelation and rage and something that might have been relief. She wasn't broken, had never been broken. David had destroyed her over a lie. "What are you thinking?" Chang Min asked quietly. "I'm thinking I wasted 3 years believing I was defective." Her hands clenched in her lap. "I'm thinking he threw me away for something that was never my fault." Chang Min's hand found hers. "His loss." She looked at him, this dangerous, ruthless man who'd somehow become her salvation. "You're not afraid? About the babies?" His expression softened in a way she rarely saw. "Afraid? Racheal, I'm terrified, but not of being a father." He pulled the car over, turning to face her fully. "I'm terrified of losing you, of something happening to you, of not being enough to protect you and them." "You're enough," she said, and meant it. He kissed her then, soft and reverent, his hand coming to rest on her still flat stomach. "Mine," he whispered against her lips. "All 3 of you. Mine." 2 years after David threw her out in the rain, Raikel stood in front of a full-length mirror in an apartment that cost more per month than David's annual salary. Her belly was massive now, stretched tight with 2 lives that kicked and rolled and reminded her every moment that she was anything but. Barren. Chang Min appeared behind her, his arms circling her waist, hands resting protectively over the swell. Dr. Yang wants to see you today. Just a checkup. You're coming with me, Racheal said. It wasn't a question. Chang Min hadn't let her go anywhere alone in months. His protective instincts kicked into overdrive by the pregnancy. Obviously, he said, kissing her neck, I've already called the car. The clinic visit was routine. The babies were healthy. Racheal was healthy. Everything was progressing exactly as it should. They were walking out of the building when it happened, Chung Min's hand possessive on her lower back, Racheal's hand resting on her belly. The snow was falling lightly, coating the street in white. The car was waiting at the curb, sleek and black and expensive. Chang Min opened the door for her, and Raikel started to slide inside when she heard it. A sound, a strangled gasp that made her look up, and there, standing on the sidewalk like a ghost from a life she'd left behind, was David. He looked terrible. His clothes hung off a frame that had lost weight it couldn't afford to lose. His hair was greasy, receding more than she remembered. His face was unshaven, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like a man who'd been living hard and losing harder, but it was his expression that made time stop. His mouth had fallen open, his eyes gone wide with an emotion Racheal couldn't name. His hands were coming up in that pathetic gesture of shock, fingers splayed like he was trying to grasp something that was already gone. He was staring at her belly. Raikel felt Chang Min go rigid beside her, felt his hand tighten on her back, his body angling between her and David in a movement so instinctive it was probably unconscious. His other hand came to rest on her stomach, possessive and protective. Get in the car, Chung Min said quietly. His voice was calm, but Racheal had worked for him long enough to know what that calm meant. It meant violence was about 3 seconds away. But she couldn't move, couldn't stop staring at David's face, at the horror and disbelief and something that looked like betrayal in his expression, like he had any right to feel betrayed, like he hadn't been the one who destroyed everything. Racheal? David's voice cracked on her name. He took a step forward. Raikel, are you? Chang Min moved before David could finish the question. One step put him completely between Raikel and her ex-husband, his body a wall David couldn't see through. The movement was fluid, practiced, the instinct of a man who'd spent his life as a predator. No, Chung Min said. Just one word, but it carried the weight of a threat and a promise. David's eyes finally left Racheal's belly and landed on Chang Min. Racheal watched recognition flicker across David's face, watched him register the expensive suit, the tattoos climbing Chang Min's neck, the silver rings on his fingers, the absolute certainty in his posture. Who the hell are you? David demanded, but his voice shook. Chang Min didn't answer. He turned slightly, just enough to look at Racheal, his hand extending toward her. Car, now. This time, Racheal moved. She slid into the back seat, her heart hammering, her hands instinctively protecting her belly. Chung Min followed her in, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. Through the tinted window, Racheal could see David still standing there, hands still outstretched, mouth still open. He looked like a man watching his entire world rewrite itself, like a man realizing the biggest mistake of his life was standing 20 feet away, pregnant with someone else's children, completely beyond his reach. The car pulled away from the curb, smooth and silent. Chung Min's hand found Racheal's, lacing their fingers together. You okay? He asked quietly. Racheal nodded, but her throat was tight. He saw. Good, Chung Min said, and there was something dark and satisfied in his voice. Let him see. Let him understand what he threw away. Racheal looked back through the rear window. David was still standing there in the falling snow, shrinking into the distance. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, sobbing on his doorstep, begging him not to throw her away. That woman was gone, dead and buried and replaced by someone stronger, someone valued, someone who'd learned that being broken wasn't the same as being breakable. "Take me home," she said to Chung Min, squeezing his hand. He brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles, and smiled that dangerous smile. Already headed there. Behind them, David Carter stood alone in the snow, watching the car disappear around a corner. And Raikel didn't look back again. David should have let it go, should have walked away, accepted the cosmic joke, and moved on with what remained of his life. But obsession is a poison that doesn't need permission to spread. It started with one Google search. Chang Min's name typed into a search bar at 2 a.m. in David's studio apartment that smelled like stale beer and regret. The results made his blood run cold. Chang Min wasn't just wealthy, he was dangerous. Articles about the Black Serpent syndicate buried in true crime forums, whispers about legitimate businesses fronting for something darker, photos of Chang Min at charity galas, standing next to politicians who probably owed him favors they'd never admit to. David's hands shook as he scrolled. This was the man holding Racheal, touching her, protecting her, the father of children that should have been David's. Except they couldn't be David's. That truth had been sitting in his email inbox for 2 days now, waiting for him to acknowledge it. The clinic he'd visited last week, desperate to understand, had sent the results. Low sperm count, severe morphology issues. The doctor's note had been clinical. Patient has likely been infertile for 5 to 7 years. Natural conception. Highly unlikely without intervention. David had bribed Dr. Morrison 3 years ago to falsify Racheal's results. Had paid $5,000 he'd borrowed from a loan shark to make sure the paperwork said she was the problem. Because his ego couldn't handle being the broken one. Because he'd already had his eye on that bartender who'd been flirting with him, young and impressed by his car and his promises. The bartender had left him 6 months later when the money ran out. Dr. Morrison had been killed in a car accident shortly after, an accident David now suspected wasn't accidental at all. And Racheal had been out there, believing she was Barren, when the whole time it was him. He'd robbed her of 3 years, and now someone else was reaping what David had sown. The obsession turned into surveillance. David started following them, careful to stay distant, to blend into crowds. He watched them at restaurants, at medical appointments, at the luxury high-rise where they lived. He watched Chang Min's hand never leave Racheal's body, watched the way his men formed a protective circle wherever they went, watched Raikel smile in a way she'd never smiled for David. The jealousy ate him alive, the knowledge that he'd destroyed his own future, that those babies existed because he'd thrown away the only woman who'd ever loved him. It was unbearable. Gambling had always been David's weakness. Now it became his destruction. He owed $200,000 to people who didn't accept excuses. They'd given him 2 weeks. He had 3 days left and $1,247 to his name. But he had information, he had leverage, and he had nothing left to lose. David waited until he saw Chang Min leave in a convoy of black SUVs, clearly headed somewhere important. Then he made his move, approaching Racheal outside her doctor's office, where she'd gone for a routine appointment. She was alone except for one bodyguard, a younger guy who looked tough but not experienced. "Raikel," David called out. She froze, turned, her expression went from surprise to disgust in half a second. "No, just hear me out." David moved closer, ignoring the bodyguard's hand moving to his hip. "I know who he is, what he is. The Black Serpent Syndicate, right? Do you have any idea what he does? The people he's hurt? Get away from me." "I could go to the police," David said, and watched her face pale. "I could tell them everything, where you live, what businesses he owns. I've been watching, Raikel. I've been documenting." The bodyguard stepped forward, but Racheal held up a hand. Her eyes were chips of ice. "What do you want?" "I want you to come back," David said, and even he could hear the desperation in his voice. "We could start over, raise those babies together. I know they're not mine, but I could—" "Are you insane?" Racheal's laugh was sharp enough to cut. You threw me away like garbage. You destroyed me. And now you want me back because I'm pregnant with someone else's children? They should have been mine. The words exploded out of him. I got tested, Racheal. It was me. I'm the one who can't... His voice cracked. It was always me. And I blamed you. I destroyed us for nothing. Something flickered across her face. Understanding, maybe, or confirmation of something she'd already suspected. You knew, she said softly. When you kicked me out, you already knew. David couldn't meet her eyes. The bartender was younger. You thought you could trade me in for a newer model and blame me for being broken when you were the defective one. Racheal's hand rested on her belly, protective. Well, you were wrong. About me. About everything. $3 million, David said. The number had come to him in the middle of the night, desperate and ridiculous and necessary. Give me $3 million and I disappear. You never hear from me again. But if you don't... I'll tell Chang Min about this conversation, Racheal interrupted, and he'll kill you, probably slowly. And I'll tell the police everything first. David pulled out his phone, showed her the photos he'd taken, the notes he'd compiled. I've already written it all down. If anything happens to me, it goes straight to the FBI. So you have a choice, Raikel. Pay me or watch your mafia boyfriend go to prison. The bodyguard's hand was definitely on his gun now. Raikel stared at David for a long moment, and he saw something in her expression that made his stomach drop. Not fear, not desperation, calculation. I'll think about it, she said finally. Give me 3 days. David nodded, backing away. 3 days. I'll call you. He turned and walked away, heart hammering, certain he'd won. Certain that Raikel would pay to protect her new life. Certain that he'd found his way out. He was wrong. 3 days later, David's phone rang, unknown number. He answered it, expecting Raikel. Mr. Carter? A male voice, smooth and cold. My name is Kim Tae-won. I represent the Iron Tigers. I understand you have information about the Black Serpent Syndicate's heirs. David's mouth went dry. He'd made one more search, one more desperate play. The Iron Tigers were rivals to Chung Min's syndicate, and David had sent them a message offering what he knew about Racheal and the babies. He'd expected money, expected protection, expected a way out that didn't depend on Racheal's mercy. I have information, David said carefully. What's it worth to you? $50,000, cash, and safe passage out of the city. A pause. But we need proof. Bring the woman to the old cannery on Pier 17 tomorrow at midnight. Come alone. Once we verify she's who you say she is, you get paid. David's hands were shaking. How do I get her there? That's your problem, but Mr. Carter? The voice dropped to something that sounded almost friendly. Don't try to play us. We're not as patient as the Black Serpent. The line went dead. David stared at his phone, mind racing. He'd crossed a line. He knew that. But he was drowning, and drowning men don't think about consequences. They just grab whatever floats by. He sent Racheal a text. I have information about Chang Min's rivals planning to attack. Meet me at Pier 17, midnight tomorrow. Come alone, or they'll know I warned you. The message sat unread for 20 minutes. Then, fine. David should have known it was too easy. Should have realized that Racheal had been playing him from the moment he'd approached her. Should have understood that a woman running a crime syndicate's financial empire wasn't the same terrified girl he'd thrown out 3 years ago. But desperation makes people stupid. The cannery at Pier 17 was a skeleton of rusted metal and broken dreams. David arrived at 11:45 p.m., his heart trying to escape his chest. The Iron Tigers were already there, 6 men in dark clothes, all of them carrying weapons like other people carry phones. She's coming, David said, his voice too high. She'll be here. Kim Tae-won stepped forward. He was tall, scarred, smiling like a shark. You better hope so. for your sake. Raikel arrived at midnight exactly, stepping out of a car David didn't recognize. She was wearing all black, her pregnant belly impossible to hide. She walked toward them slowly, one hand on her stomach, no fear in her expression. Raikel, thank God, David started. These men were— I know who they are, Raikel interrupted. She looked at Kim Tae-won. The Iron Tigers. You're here for the heirs. Kim's smile widened. Smart woman. And you came anyway. I came because I was invited. Raikel's hand moved to something in her coat pocket. And because my husband wanted me to tell you something. The world exploded. Black SUVs screamed onto the pier from 3 different directions, tires shrieking. Armed men poured out like a flood of lethal intent. The building's perimeter lit up with laser sights, at least 20 of them, all trained on the Iron Tigers. And then Chang Min stepped out of the shadows behind Racheal, and David's bladder nearly gave out. He was dressed for war, black tactical gear, weapons visible at his hip and thigh, his face a mask of cold fury. Behind him came more men, and more, and more. David counted 15 before he stopped counting. Protocol 0, Chung Min said quietly. The words carried across the pier like a death sentence. You touched my wife. You threatened my children. There is no negotiation. There is no mercy. There is only your ending. Kim Tae-won reached for his weapon. He was dead before his hand touched the grip. The gunshot echoed across the water, and then everything went to hell. The firefight lasted 90 seconds. David hit the ground, covering his head, screaming. Men died around him. The Iron Tigers, outnumbered and outgunned, fell one by one. Kim Tae-won tried to run and made it 6 feet before Chang Min put a bullet in his spine. When the shooting stopped, the silence was worse than the noise. David looked up to find Chang Min standing over him. Behind him, Racheal was being ushered into an armored vehicle by 3 bodyguards. She looked pale, but unharmed. Please, David whispered. Please, I didn't know. They said they just wanted information. I needed money. I was desperate. Chang Min crouched down, bringing them eye to eye. You used my wife as bait. You sold the location of my unborn children to my enemies. You threatened everything I care about. His hand moved to the gun at his hip. Give me one reason I shouldn't end you right here. David was crying now, tears and snot running down his face. I'm sorry. I was wrong. About everything. Please. You were wrong 3 years ago when you threw away a diamond and called it broken, Chung Min said. You were wrong when you came back begging, and you're wrong now if you think sorry means anything. The gunshot was quieter than David expected. There was a moment of confusion, a strange numbness, and then nothing at all. Racheal felt the first contraction as they were loading her into the SUV. She gasped, hand flying to her belly, and one of the bodyguards caught her. Boss, she's in labor. Chang Min was there in seconds, David's blood still on his hands, his face transformed from killer to terrified father in an instant. Hospital, now, move. The drive was a blur of pain and pressure. Racheal gripped Chang Min's hand hard enough to break bones, and he never flinched. You came, she gasped between contractions. You knew. You think I'd let you walk into a trap alone? He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, anywhere he could reach. You've been wearing a tracker for 6 months. I've had men on you every second. When David contacted the Tigers, we knew within an hour. You used me as bait, Raikel said, but there was no anger in it, just understanding. I used you as a queen, Chung Min corrected, and queens don't hide. They face their enemies and watch them fall. The hospital was private, secure, and already expecting them. Raikel was in a delivery room within minutes, Chang Min refusing to leave her side, even when the nurses tried to make him. I have blood on my hands, he said. I don't care, Racheal gasped. Don't you dare leave me. He stayed, held her hand, murmured in Korean, words of love and promises and prayers to gods he probably didn't believe in. And when the first baby emerged, screaming into the world, Chang Min's face crumpled into something Racheal had never seen before. Joy, pure, unfiltered joy. A boy, the doctor announced, perfect and healthy. Min-jun, Chung Min whispered, touching his son's tiny hand with a finger still trembling. His name is Min-jun. The second baby came 12 minutes later. Another boy, smaller but just as loud, just as perfect. Tae-hyun, Racheal said, exhausted and radiant. Min-jun and Tae-hyun. They lay there in the hospital bed, Racheal propped up against Chung Min's chest, each of them holding a baby. Outside the room, armed guards stood watch, somewhere across. The city, David's body was being disappeared by men who specialized in making problems vanish. The Iron Tigers were being systematically dismantled by the Black Serpent Syndicate. But in this room, there was only peace, only family, only the sound of two newborns breathing and two parents who'd found each other in the ruins of their separate destructions. He's gone, Chung Min said quietly. David, the Tigers, all of it. You're safe now. Racheal looked down at Min-jun in her arms, at Tae-hyun and Chang Min's, and felt something settle in her chest that had been restless for 3 years. I was always safe, she said, from the moment you decided I was worth saving. Chung Min kissed her temple, careful not to disturb the babies. You didn't need saving. You just needed someone to see what you already were. And what's that? A queen, he said simply. My queen. Outside, snow began to fall on a city that had no idea what had transpired tonight. Somewhere, in a life that felt like a distant nightmare, Racheal had been broken and thrown away and told she was worthless. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned that being discarded wasn't the end. Sometimes it was just the beginning, and sometimes the trash one man throws away becomes another man's treasure, something he'll burn the world to protect. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. Because Racheal Carter is now Racheal Min, mother to 2 heirs, wife to a dragon who proved that love doesn't just protect, it destroys anything that threatens what it holds dear.